Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and this week in Reykjavik, we're getting towards Halloween, I guess, although that's everywhere in the world that celebrates it. It's not really such a big deal over here, you know. Like, I get the sense that it means the most to people who are out in the States. Iceland doesn't really do Halloween, I think. There are some other weird holidays here where you dress up, but they are like attached to different days. But the world is going nuts about Halloween, as it always does at this time of the year. And I always get a little swept up in it. I'm not the type to be dressing up and going out to Halloween parties, and there's not much like buying buckets and buckets of candy for trick-or-treaters or anything like that. But certainly on gamer Twitter, it becomes a big deal. And, you know, we can see on the games that have been coming out on Game Pass and on PlayStation Plus, there is a focus on horror games at this time of the year. It's like the annual horror games festival. So I always get sucked in. I've played a couple horror games, and I was vaguely planning to have a Halloween episode like I did last year when I covered Inscription and so forth. But I didn't really click with any of the games I tried. I tried 4 different horror games this year, and I'm going to talk through a few of those. Some I liked more than others. But the main game that I've actually played is nothing to do with Halloween in the last week. It's a game that was recommended to me by a couple of people. It's an indie text adventure with a very interesting spin on that classic old school genre. Like, you don't get much more old school than text adventures. But I really enjoyed this game, and I'm excited to talk about it today. And it is Roadwarden, the story of a Roadwarden who explores a wild part of a kingdom with some political motive from their employer, but also in the spirit of exploring and a little bit of self-discovery and relationship building and discovering just what is out there. I had an absolutely wonderful time with that game, so that will be the featured game of this episode. And it also has a very melancholic guitar finger-picking soundtrack that we're listening to a little bit of right now. So the music is going to be a little downbeat on this episode, but it's all quite mellow. It's just a little sad, so get ready for some more sad music throughout this episode. But before we get to Roadwarden, let's talk about those horror games. So there have been a few that I have had in my collection for a while, whether I've picked them up on sale or whether I've just gotten them from a subscription service. The first one is Scorn. This game seems to have been in development forever, but I hadn't heard about it pretty much until it dropped. It is the H.R. Giger-inspired gothic body horror first-person science fiction game in which you awaken in a truly horrific place, like a biomechanical cityscape with large cavernous interiors that seem to have ribs on the inside of them. There's fleshy matter growing in places. It seems to be abandoned or all but abandoned, and you are tasked with just forging forwards, trying to understand what this world is. Seems to be a text-free game, and you just confronted with some pretty tricksy multi-part puzzles using buttons to make machines start up whilst not really knowing what those machines do. For example, a crane comes down, reaches out for something, there's nothing there, and then it retracts again. So you're like, okay, maybe in the future that's going to be useful. And so you basically have to wander around this horrible, abandoned, creepy city, hellscape, basically. I'm trying to figure out what things do by prodding the buttons on them, like a chair with a saw that comes into it, a pretty horrible looking torture device thing. And you go from floor to floor in the first area, and it's very atmospheric and beautiful to look at in a completely macabre way. But it's got an incredible art style. There is fog everywhere. Everything is glistening. It's all dark and murky and grayscale. And you really feel like aliens might start to just break out of the walls and come for you. But at the same time, it feels very, very abandoned. It's a truly bleak place. You're in the remnants of some kind of society that has long since gone. So I went into this one, and my first impression in the first, few minutes were, okay, I could get into this. This looks incredible. It's amazing to just look at this art exhibit that I'm walking through. They've done an incredible job on the visuals of this game. But quickly I started to turn on the game and to become pretty frustrated. It has a very slow walk speed, more of a shuffle really. And the environment reads quite badly, I think. Sometimes there are lights that shine onto things that seem to be trying to direct your attention to them. But when you walk over, you can't interact with them. So you end up just prodding the button, seeing if you're missing anything. And then at other times, there are things that you are supposed to interact with that you could quite easily walk past and miss entirely. So at that point, when I realized that, I started to become frustrated with it. Especially if you combine a bad walk speed with an unreadable environment, then what you get is the experience of shuffling around a super cool game world, failing to engage with the mechanics that you need to engage with to progress. And that involves a lot of backtracking. So in the first big puzzle, you can see many, many playthroughs of this online. This game has made a bit of an impact, and certainly on Twitch and YouTube and so forth. I watched a couple playthroughs after I bounced off it myself, and I saw people having the same problems I was having. They were missing things, they were having to backtrack and then turn around and walk back through very large environments to places they had been already, repeatedly trying to figure out this big obtuse puzzle that starts off the game. So I became very frustrated with this. I played for about an hour, and then I just became really, really enraged by it, actually. Like, it had quite a visceral effect on me. I was like, this game is wasting my time. I feel that the design isn't up to the job, and that it's maybe more intended as a visual environment to experience, but the game itself seems completely broken to me. But this has been a very, very divisive game. Like, people who love it really love it, and people that don't really don't. So it's been hugely divisive, and I've enjoyed a little bit watching the discourse unfold online about Scorn. It's going on in the show's Discord even. There are people playing it who are enjoying it more than others. I'm at the extreme low end. Like, I think it's pretty much broken and barely playable. Other people are a little higher on it in our Discord, but in the media, there are some people that are really high on it, including critics that I respect, like Jacob Geller, the YouTuber, is really high on this game and enjoyed playing through it. I think it seems to be impacting differently on people based on how patient they are, based on how much time they're willing to spend wrapping their mind around a large puzzle that doesn't seem to want to be solved. So there's a real mixed bag of opinions out there about Scorn right now. I'm certainly one of the ones that bounced off it and had a completely miserable experience with this game and won't be coming back to it. But like I said, it's visually stunning, and I am curious about where it goes. So it's not like it has nothing to offer, but it certainly wasn't a game for me. I may end up watching more people playing through it and try and find a streamer that I like just to watch what happens in the game, because I want to see, I just don't want to play it. So that was Scorn. It's on Game Pass, by the way, so if that sounds like something you would like to try, I would definitely encourage people to try this game. It's something to check out and something to just see where you land on it, because if it hits for you, it might really hit. The next one that I tried is something that's been a little less divisive and is actually quite popular. It's Little Nightmares. I got this game on the PlayStation Plus monthly downloads offer sometime last year, I think, and I've tried to get into this one before. I think I tried it last Halloween. This is another one that I've bounced off multiple times, actually, because it's another game that has a lovely, lovely art style. This one has a more of a Tim Burton-y, creepy art style where you play a very small person, seemingly like child-sized, in a yellow anorak, and you wander through a 2.5D side-scrolling series of environments. And it's very macabre from the off. Like one of the first rooms that you walk through, there are two legs just hanging into the frame from above, seemingly from someone who has hung themselves. There is great use of dark and light. You realize pretty quickly that you can light up a little Zippo lighter and get a pool of light around you, which is both helpful and scary because you're obviously letting anything that is around you know that you are there. And it's very much like Inside, I would say, but nowhere near as good. Inside, whilst it had its moments of frustration, was quietly compelling all the way through, and I felt like the mechanics were well tutorialized, so I always knew what I was doing, even if some of the puzzles were sometimes a little convoluted and took a few tries to get through. And Inside was a game that, from the creators of Limbo, that enjoyed destroying the player. So you play as this little black shade that is sometimes just killed by, dogs, falling objects, large chasms that you drop into, drowning, being shot or murdered. And your poor little protagonist is constantly being just exploded and destroyed. Little Nightmares seems to try and take some of that DNA, but it's much less compelling in all areas, I would say. The visual style isn't quite as good, and I just kept thinking of Inside as I was playing it, like it's almost like it's a post-Inside game, that is for sure. And I didn't like the controls in this one. I felt that they were muddy. I didn't like that the button prompts in the initial tutorialization, they come up so late. Like there's a part at the very start where you walk down a corridor and it leads to a dead end. I was trying out button, see if I could jump up to a vent or something. Nothing was really working. Ended up walking all the way back to the start of the corridor. It's like a couple minutes, and then all the way back to the end again, just looking for something to do. And then a button prompt appeared and said if you hold down the left trigger, you can grip on something, and then you can just open the vent and go in. The same thing happened again and again where you're trying to figure out what to do, and the button prompt appears late, like so late, frustratingly late, not like a tutorial at all, but more like a hint. And when you're teaching someone the controls, it shouldn't be like a hint. It should be very clear and upfront. Let them learn the controls and then let them play the game from then on and then get into your puzzle. So Little Nightmares made a terrible first impression on me. I felt like either the tutorial is broken or bad. It also has this die and retry gameplay, but I was often misjudging where I was in this 2.5D environment, like walking towards something that looked safe and then realizing I'd just actually walked off the edge of something. The perspective wasn't quite right to me. The jump didn't feel good, so I'd misjudge my jumps, fall and die, start again, and then walk off the edge because the jump wasn't responsive or because I'd misjudged the perspective. And whilst I really liked the macabre art style, and I wish I could get into Little Nightmares, again, it was just not the one for me. I couldn't play it. But in better news, two of the other games that I tried were actually really good. There's a game that's been on my wish list forever called Echo. I heard about it on a couple podcasts, saw it on a couple of best of lists. I actually sometimes go back into best of game of the year lists from random years, like say 2014, 2016, and just scour them for games that I've never heard of, because there are always some in the 6th or 10th or 15th position that crept into the best of lists, but maybe weren't quite popular enough to make it into that top tier. And Echo was one of those. It seems to be a cult hit. What I'm looking for when I do that is cult games that I might have missed, games that some people really gravitated to but didn't become popular. Echo is definitely one of those. It's from a Nordic studio called Ultra Ultra, who sadly broke up after this game due to poor sales. But when you look at this game, it seems to have hit written all over it. It's a sci-fi with a really cool art style. You come out of hypersleep and you're a porcelain-skinned, almost android-looking creature with an aristocratic voice who is looking for a place called the Palace. So you descend to the surface of this strange planet and enter this massive structure that you have to clamber across with jumping and climbing and that sort of thing. You learn about your endurance. You can take a fall, but then you have to recharge, that kind of thing. And you break your way in, and it's a vast, abandoned, ornate interior, like antechambers and function rooms with huge mirrors with gilded frames, piles of chairs, like you could set up, a royal visit or an ambassadorial residence or a wedding or something like that. It's a very strange, functional space, but also ornate and beautiful. Candelabras with glowing crystals, white walls. Really creepy, vast, empty. And you accidentally wake up a guard system, and that guard system produces a whole bunch of clones of you. And you have to stealth your way around through this palace looking for the source of its power whilst being stalked by clones of you. But occasionally the lights will just go out entirely. It's the start of a news cycle. And at that moment, all the clones will learn what you did. So if you've been vaulting over things, jumping from level to level, used your gun, then the clones will have learned those tricks too. And if they see you, they will use them against you. But if you didn't use those tricks, then they won't learn them in the next cycle. So it's a very interesting AI chess game with stealth elements, really cool visual style. And I've enjoyed the opening section of it. I'm not a natural stealth game enthusiast and tend to end up blowing my cover pretty quickly, thinking it's something to do with spatial awareness, like that 2.5D problem in Little Nightmares. It's like the vision cone of enemies. I will sometimes just accidentally trip it. I don't quite understand the things that are, for example, behind me in a game. I find it hard to visualize if it's not on screen. So stealth isn't naturally my thing, but Echo is really cool, and there's just something about it. It's one of those games that has something about it, like Control did, like an inexorable pull on my attention. It's just drawing me to play it. So I will continue with that one. Maybe you'll hear me talk about it again. The final one I want to talk about is a very popular game. For a lot of people, it's an all-time great. That's Dead Space. There is a remake of it coming, and I've been following the preview coverage and enjoying it, hearing people talking about it. And Dead Space is an old game. I think it's 2008. It's on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. But because of Xbox's excellent backwards compatibility and the vast catalogue of Game Pass, you can just download it onto your modern Xbox, and it runs absolutely flawlessly. So I did that, and I can see immediately I've played about 1 hour of this game. I had to take breaks. It's creepy, but it's brilliant. My God. So in this one, it's another sci-fi premise where you go into deep space, investigating a ship that went missing, a mining ship. You crash land on the mining ship for reasons. And then when you go into it, you discover that something horrible has happened. There is blood everywhere. Everyone is missing. Half the systems are down. Your crew splits up. They go looking for the control room and leave you to mind the ship. You're like the guard one, and then there's like this captain and engineer. Everything goes wrong. You end up creeping around these dark corridors with creatures bursting out of air vents, coming up out of the floor and coming at you. You have to mind your ammo. There is a super survival horror vibe to this one. You have to shoot off the limbs of a creature, and then you can stamp on them. It's super gory, super gross. But it brings to mind the atmosphere of the Alien movies. And it's just got a lot of decisions that were well made. Like, if you bring up the menu, it's like a transparent AR menu that floats on top of the environment. So you can walk and look at the menu at the same time. If you press aim, you snap out of that menu and go into aim mode immediately. When people talk to you, they video comm you. And the weak side of this game is that it's aging. It looks pretty great, but for example, facial animation has come on so much since this game was made. But they seem to know that at the time. And so the most times that you see faces, they are on this blurry, staticky video relay, and they are telling you messages and what you should do next and that kind of thing, or what's happening to them. And so it kind of conceals the facial animation. So I think that Lots and lots and lots of good decisions have been made in this game. It plays amazingly well. The movement feels great. The shooting feels great. The scenario is truly creepy. It's like a classic monsters in an abandoned space station vibe. There's lots of mist and fog. You have to go into unknown sectors. And I think this game's just going to go from strength to strength. I'm very excited about it. So I'm going to keep playing Dead Space 2. So, guys, I tried to do a Halloween episode. I didn't quite get there, but we've got a solid little horror game block there. Not such a big fan of Scorn or Little Nightmares. Bounced on both of those. But really into Echo, really into Dead Space. Seems like the sci-fi horror is appealing to me. And I'm going to try and play those games, even if it is in daylight hours. So that's our horror block and Halloween block. I would love to hear from you if you're playing horror games, if you've got indie horror game recommendations, things you'd like to hear me talk about on this show. Definitely come and find me. I'm on Twitter as Gaming in the Wild. You can say hello there. I will also mention this is a patron-supported show. If you would like to join the Discord and get a bunch of bonus episodes about music, about travel, off-topic things, spoiler casts, that kind of thing, there are 8 episodes in the backlog and more coming. I make a few a year, and you are welcome to join the Patreon at patreon.com/gaminginthewild for as little as $1. Join the show's community and get those bonus episodes. So thanks very much to everyone that is a patron. Thanks to everyone who has rated the show on Spotify, left a review on iTunes. All of that helps. And thank you to you for listening. And with all of that said, let's move on and talk about the featured game of this episode, Roadwarden. So Roadwarden is a 2022 game by Moral Anxiety, which is the studio name of a solo developer called Maciej Gajeros, and I'm sorry if I've pronounced that wrongly. I did try my best and even look it up. It's published by Assemble Entertainment. It's available on Linux, PC, and Mac. I got it on Steam. It ran flawlessly on my Mac, not a single bug, not a single issue. All good there. This game was recommended to me by a couple people. It was recommended by a work colleague called Anders. A very astute recommendation from him, so thank you to that recommendation. I've also seen some talk about it from various people on Twitter and noticed that Jake at the pre-order bonus cast did an episode about it too, and an interview with the developer, which I will be going and listening to. It is a text adventure with pixel art tableaus. Very interesting to see a straight-up text adventure. I'm not sure I've played one since I was a kid, pretty much. Like, lots of games have literary or text-heavy aspects to them, but this one is a pure text adventure, pretty much, even though it does have those little pixel graphics that show you where you are and that kind of thing. I did actually play text adventures as a kid, and so there was something really nostalgic about this to me, like going in different directions and reading and finding out about strange places just through text, and it did dust off some old instincts and feelings that I had, which might have contributed to my deep enjoyment of this game. I played one as a kid called Sphinx Adventure, and definitely got some nostalgic flashbacks to the text adventure days of the 80s. Metacritic has this at an 85 from 4 reviews, which is a very high score for an indie game, very respectable. I hope that this game gets a bit of traction and gets more reviews, because it sure does deserve them. How Long to Beat has it at 16 hours for the story, 20 for extras, 40 for completionists. I came in at about 20 hours across 4 sessions, so my average session was 5 hours. I just got completely sucked in and addicted to this game. It's the kind of game where you wake up thinking about when you can play it next, and then finish work and just open it up before you've even eaten dinner. I just always wanted to be playing Roadwarden. I was thinking about it constantly on some back brain subroutine, like throughout my days whilst I was playing this game. And the developers describe it like this. They say Roadwarden is an illustrated, text-based RPG that uses isometric pixel art and combines mechanics borrowed from RPGs, visual novels, adventure games, and interactive fiction. So a super functional description there, which I can respect. And I say, Roadwarden is an evocative text adventure about a 40-day journey in which you and your humble steed explore a wild peninsula in a high fantasy kingdom. With meaningful choices, branching paths, plural solutions, and leeway to roleplay as you wish, it's addictive, absorbing, and sometimes inspired. So I really loved this game right from the beginning. It has a beautiful pixel art intro screen with clouds raking across the sky, with little pixel birds flying. You get a different quote every time you continue your game that tells you just a little something about this world. It's very well presented. And it starts when you, as a newly appointed Roadwarden, appointed by the Merchants Guild of Haviland, I think is called. It's the central capital city of this country that you're in. And you are commissioned to go north, far north, to the untamed peninsula at the edge of the kingdom, some untamed wilds, and you are tasked with talking to locals, discovering what you can, and doing the job of a road warden, which is to keep the paths safe, to look out for travelers in distress. But you're also tasked with assessing their resources, their willingness to open trade routes. And so you have this slightly political agenda as well, and people know that about you when you arrive. And there is enough freedom in this story that you can lean into or away from that task if you want to. Like, you might have sympathy for the people of the North, or you might be true to your task, knowing that when you go back, if you go back, that it's going to stand you in good stead to have opened up a trade route. Maybe it will help the North. Maybe they need that money coming in. It's pretty destitute up there. Maybe they just would be better off left alone. It's up to you to decide. That's a very cool aspect of this game. So you're low-key deciding, will you favour the locals or your powerful big city masters, and what would be the best outcome for you and for them and for the country. Really interesting stuff. And at the start of the game, you start by making a few choices. You can choose difficulty. Casual has no time limit, and you start with more cash, and combat is a little less difficult, I think. Standard, you have 40 in-game days before you have to return. So you're there in summer on the peninsula, but when autumn comes and the days get darker, you have to go back. It's no good being up on that peninsula in the darkness. There is also a restrictive difficulty, which gives you less time and makes things a little harder for you. I think you get 30 days in that one. I played on standard. I think the time limit gave me some focus. It gave my journey some focus. It made me have some impetus. I didn't have limitless time to just meander around the kingdom, or the peninsula rather. I had to make my days count, and that lended a certain urgency to the way that I played the game. I knew that I was going to run out of time eventually, that my game was going to end. And there were many mysteries to uncover. So I definitely tried to be economical with my time, and I appreciate that. I think it's not a popular mechanic to have that kind of limitation placed on your playtime. But I think in this game, it actually works really well. It does mean that you have a season in this environment, and you have that amount of time and that amount of time only, and it definitely makes you play a certain way and pushes you forward in a way that I think is pretty productive. It did mean that by the end I had to rush a little. I think I lost my way a little in the middle of the game and wasted some days traveling from place to place, going to places that were far away from me and wasting all of my time in that travel, rather than planning my route around the peninsula in a more methodical way to try and squeeze the time for every bit of information I could get. And that meant that I failed a couple of quests, but to be honest, I embraced the failure. I think it's part of the role play of this journey, and I was satisfied with my journey in the end. There were a couple of deep mysteries that I didn't quite get to, but I got most of the way with most of them and solved an awful lot. I think I had 5 quests of 40 or something outstanding by the time I reached the end of my journey. You also pick your class at the start. You can be a warrior, You can be a mage, and I think the other one might be a scribe. I don't quite remember. I picked warrior. It helps you out with combat. Mage gives you magic aptitude, and the other class, I believe, allows you to read. If you are a warrior, you can't read, which does block certain things to you. But a lot of people can't read in this medieval world, medieval fantasy world, and being a warrior was actually pretty good. You also pick your religion. You can be a devout who worships the United Church, the kind of not traditional, but the most popular religion. It's like the Christianity of this game, but it's like a parallel world Christianity. You can be a pagan who worships the old gods, like the nature gods, a little bit like in England, basically. And I guess like all around the world, especially in Europe, there were pagan traditions that predated Christianity. It's very interesting. They often lean into nature. They're a little bit more wild and interesting, you know. I chose to be a pagan. There was a third option. Again, I don't quite remember it. But so I was a warrior. I was a pagan warrior. And people remarked on that, you know, the choices that I made. I certainly got comments from people about my weaponry and stature. And when people found out I was pagan and yet representing the city, which is the cradle of the mainstream religion of this country, they definitely raised an eyebrow. Being a pagan certainly meant that when I met other pagan characters, they were a little more open to me, but there were other more devout people that you meet who might notice your pagan ways and be a little less open with you. So those are some really consequential role-playing decisions right at the start of the game. I went through them quite quickly, but it is worth, I would say, when you start this game, really letting the words soak in about what those choices mean and choosing wisely. I was happy with my choices in the end. Being a warrior certainly eased things along for me. There's a lot of combat or hostile encounters in this game, and I sailed through most of them. If I had been a magic user, I would have been interested to see how it affected my playthrough. I think it would have had probably quite a substantial effect on things. Really interesting that the classes matter so much. And after you've made those first opening choices, the story begins. You arrive at the northern peninsula. You arrive at a camp that is on its last legs. You arrive at the fortress, this wooden fence with spikes on the top. You have options right from the start. You can just trot up to the gate on your horse. You can dismount and circle the camp. You can try and reconnaissance by peeking in, that kind of thing. So straight away, you're into the multi-choice nature of the game. You click on the choice that you want. I peeked in carefully and saw that there were two people inside, just two soldiers sitting back to back, not looking at each other, just gazing at the fence. It's a melancholy scene, a grim scene. And they tell you that their squad has been decimated. They are supposed to be the Empire's outpost, and they are just ruined. There's only two left. They've lost a lot of people. They've had monster attacks. Giant monsters have been pawing at the fence. They tell you about the dangers of this place and the bleakness of it. And they speak of the locals with distrust and suspicion. They are grim. They tell you that there is a road to the west with an inn on the way to the first town, the first village, and they tell you that the eastern road is rough and dangerous. It has a red painted sign for people that can't read, and red means blood there, which just means that it's a dangerous place. It's a wonderful beginning and a wonderful intro to this wild peninsula that you're going to be exploring in Roadwarden. You also start the game with a couple of leads. You know that there was a previous Roadwarden called Asterion who rode a dinosaur, like a dragon-type creature, who's been missing, and that's why you've been appointed to try and open this trade route. You get a personal goal based on a few things that you've chosen at the start of your journey. You have that lead that there is a town nearby, that there is an inn on the way if you head west, so the game's trying to ease you in that direction, and I took that invitation. And all of this information goes into your journal. That's going to be very useful for you as the game progresses. Knowledge is recorded there in text for you to revisit. It acts as a kind of a diary, almost like a written diary of all of your discoveries. It's pretty much like a notebook of your trip that you can present at the end. You're taking notes on all of the people that you've met, the groups that you've encountered, the towns that you've visited, the villages, etc. There isn't really towns. I keep saying towns. That's like an Icelandic thing, honestly. Like in Iceland, they call small places towns that have just a couple of thousand people living there. They would be considered villages in most places in the world. And the peninsula is made up of a handful of tiny villages in different states of precarity or prosperity, relative prosperity in this difficult place. Not many people, but with key characters that you will meet, that you will encounter, who can tell you things and that sort of thing. So the journal becomes a really useful resource. It helps you to remember the names of people that you have met, which town is which, what status your quests are in. It updates automatically. It's really well put together. It acts as like a mini encyclopedia whilst feeling like your own notebook in a really cool way. I really like the way that it organized information for me and allowed me to have a resource that was filling out as I went, that I wasn't having to make myself, because otherwise it would have been a game with a lot of scribbling into a notebook. So it's great that it automates that for you. So I chose to go west as I was advised. Along the way I found a large, strange old tree with an altar next to it. And I got my first text box in the game. So you're allowed sometimes to have scripted responses, such as ride quickly through the plain or stop to harvest berries. So you can have options, but occasionally you'll just get a text box. So it'll say, what do you want to do to the tree? So I wrote, sing, kneel, pray, speak, kiss, that kind of thing, just testing out the limits. And you'll get a response for most of them. So there are moments where you can just type in anything, like the old text adventures, and there are a lot of moments where you get options that you can choose. Passed by that tree, got to the inn, and as I was discovering these locations, they were marked on my map, which starts pretty much blank with just the very first camp on your road to the peninsula. It's all blacked out apart from that little pixel house at the bottom. If you hover over that, it will tell you that it's the camp. If you hover over the tree, it will say this is where the big tree and the altar was, etc. And the map slowly fills in as you go clockwise around this peninsula, at least if you chose the safer western route like I did. So there's the map view, but when you arrive at a site, you're in the traditional view of the game, the main view you'll be looking at throughout this game, and that includes the screen being split into 3 panes. There is a pixel image pane on the left, there is a text pane in the middle, and a status pane on the right. The text one is the biggest, but on the left there is a panel where pixel images will appear of the location that you are at, like an isometric pixel tableau showing the slightly animated trees, showing trails and rocks and that kind of thing. So it's like a little visual accompaniment that goes with the text that you're reading, and it adds a huge amount to the game. It just helps to spur your imagination a little, gives you little cues, lets you actually look at it. It can be useful to notice features, that kind of thing. And sometimes it's the whole area. For example, if you arrive in a forest clearing and everything is visible to you, the whole clearing will appear as an image that fills the whole pane. Sometimes only a tiny part of the pane is filled. For example, if you arrive at a village gate, you'll be able to see only what your character can see. So you can see the outer fence of the village, you can see the trees around them, you can see the path leading up to the gate. But you have to use the options to go through the gate in the text panel, and then the next part of the village will be revealed visually. And this works really nicely. For example, if you're in a village with some tall buildings, as you move through it, explore the western part, explore the town square, they will appear in that visual pane to give you a sense of exploration and discovery of the location that you are in. It will also show you, it's a visual cue that you might have missed a particular part of the village, that kind of thing, to remind you to go back. This works really well when you're exploring like a network of caves as well. You might see like a narrow passageway that opens into a large cavern that leads to a tiny cubby hole kind of thing. And all of that is shown both visually and described in really nicely written words. And it really sets the mind alight in a really cool way. Like, something about this combination of the pixel art and the text really worked for me. Like, it really made me feel like I was on this journey. The text pane is quite thick. I guess there's been like an evolution of text panes lately, in that in the old days, or at least in the 90s and 00s, there were a thick box at the bottom of the screen that pretty much went the entire width of the screen. Kind of hard to read, the opposite of what people do in newspapers, where they have narrow columns that your eyes can run over easily. But that changed up, at least in my experience, with Disco Elysium, which had a text panel on the right-hand side of the screen instead, more like a Twitter feed, more like a newspaper column. Your eyes travel across the words very quickly and it scrolls fast. This one's more like the pages of a novel, if you can imagine that, like 10, 15, 20 words in a line. And that's pretty fitting. There's going to be a lot of reading in this game. It's a very, very text-heavy game, and it was a slight adjustment to me at first. This is the most that I've read in a game since Disco Elysium, easily. But I really did settle into it. Once you settle into the mood, and you settle into the mode of just slowly scrolling, reading the paragraphs, choosing your options, choosing your dialogue choices, making decisions, and then looking at the map, selecting the next place you want to go to, and then repeating it again, doing some exploration, looking at the pixels, making your choices, finding items. It's a really nice loop once you settle into it, and I really felt the wind in my hair in this game in a really cool way. I got this sense of being on a grand adventure, and that's all the more admirable. I mean, it's admirable in any game, but it's all the more admirable given that this is a text adventure with pixel tableaus. There's something really special about that, I think. Something really special about the way that Roadwarden is presented and how it manages to summon up emotions, or at least it did for me. Then there is the status panel on the right side of the screen. This tells you a lot of interesting info. Time of day. There is a day-night cycle in this game. You have to reach somewhere to sleep by nightfall, or you have a more hostile environment in which you lose health, get into trouble with the local wildlife and that sort of thing. There's definitely a feeling that this peninsula is at the mercy of nature, of the weather, of the monsters, the giant cats that stalk the forests, hostile unicorns that are much bigger than a normal horse, packs of mythical creatures basically that fly, or griffins, that kind of thing. So you have to find somewhere to sleep. It also has your health there, it has your hunger level, your armor, and your cleanliness. And these 4 status effects are all useful in different ways. Like, your cleanliness refers to your presentation, how you smell. Do you smell like you've been on the road forever? Have you had a bath lately? And the appearance of your clothing. Your armor obviously is for combat. Hunger and health, if you run out of, obviously is a bad thing indeed. And there's also a quick save and a quick load. The fact that they are there suggests that you might be encouraged to save regularly and to reload if needed. I didn't do that much. I was role-playing the game, and so accepting failures when they occurred. That felt natural to me. Later in the game, I did sometimes wind back time a little if I had crossed the map hoping to get a certain outcome that didn't happen, or someone wasn't there, or the item wasn't where I was hoping it would be, that kind of thing. So that functionality is there for you. There's also a button to sleep or to wait. If you wait, you can pass time just in case you need to, that kind of thing. There's a button to look at your inventory. This allows you to see your currency, your purse. The dragon bones is the currency of this world. You can see your rations, weapons, essentials like a lantern or a rope. These things are used to open up new options. If you get a rope, then you can climb down a cliff. If you get a lantern, you can go into a cave, etc. So they open up new areas for exploration. You can find trade items like scrap or pelts. You can find special items like bug repellents that will allow you to pass through a wall of insects, magic stones that you're going to need for various things, and quest items like a scroll that someone's given you, a cargo to deliver, that kind of thing. In that inventory menu, you can also see the archive of your last conversation. You can see that journal that I've talked about. So there's loads of information packed into this game, from the map to the interface to your inventory, your health, lots of different things to look at and to manage. But it's handled very well. It's all quite elegant, and I really enjoyed using it and got my head around it very quickly. And I think fans of tabletop games and role-playing games and D&D will find a lot to love in Roadwarden. But I don't play those games, and I love this one too. And as you progress in the game, you get little icons that appear like achievements at the top and bottom margin of the screen, and they start to mount up. They start with like the first steps into the peninsula, exploration landmarks, quest completions, that kind of thing. And they move on to really big landmarks throughout your journey, like reaching the halfway point, finding all of the major crossroads, that kind of thing. And it's really satisfying to see your progress marked out in that way as you continue on your journey. So the main thrust of this game is exploration, and it's a lot of fun. Like, you'll find some pretty wild places. There is a feeling of hostility that I really enjoyed. Like, it's hard to stay alive. At first, you don't have much food and you don't have much money, and you really have to scrape by doing odd jobs for people, by starting to learn the lay of the land, learning how to forage, finding forage spots, finding clean water to bathe in, and finding a place to sleep for the night. You're really riding into the unknown. And people have seen Roadwardens before. They have different opinions of them, you know. Some people are suspicious that you are an emissary from the Empire, quite correctly. Others are just glad to see a guard riding around on the road who will help to clear the paths, keep the roads clear, get rid of, chase away wolf packs, that sort of thing, the roadwarden-y things that you are ostensibly tasked with as a guardian of the roads of the area. And there was a really nice feeling of slowly getting your feet on the ground, starting to learn who people are, starting to make relationships and do little favors for them. And those appear as quests in your log, such as matchmaking between villages that have not enough young people, retrieving an object from a dangerous place, looking for missing people, and just doing your own investigations too, like finding a ruined village, asking around about what happened to it, because it seems to have been struck by some kind of disaster. And as you do all of that stuff and you meet the various people, groups, mayors of villages, outback hunters, that kind of thing, people just living alone in cabins, outcasts, the river shores, the wide plains, the dense forests, you slowly start to unravel both the lay of the land, both geographically, culturally, and historically. Like, you start to learn about the past, the present, and the future of the peninsula. It's a great journey. You really do put one foot in front of the other and step into the unknown. And the game really communicates that feeling to you. It really does have the feeling of a grand adventure. And those quests pile up, and you have lots to do. As you walk around as you progress around the edge of the peninsula, it all seems to flow quite naturally, like something that you've been asked to do in the last village might involve someone from the next, or from somewhere that is behind you in your trail, in your dust, that you might encounter after an entire route around the peninsula when you've returned to the starting point. So it all seems to flow really well. I always felt like I was getting new tasks and finishing old ones. And by doing that, I was getting resources, I was getting knowledge, my journal was filling up, I was getting questions answered, or new questions that I want to find the answers to. And doing that whilst surviving, there is a very precarious feel. You really do have to guard your pennies. You really do have to look at the time of day and see how far the next place is to travel where you can sleep safely. If it's too far, maybe it's better to backtrack rather than be stuck out in the wild. Because if you do that, you will have to fight. And I mean, combat in a text adventure is obviously not relying on your Twitch reactions or anything like that, which suits me just fine. You'll often find creatures that might want to attack you, seem hostile. They might observe your approach, or they might just come for you. You can always make choices. You can try and gallop by and remain unscathed, As a warrior, that often worked out well for me. As a warrior, you will often just pass combat encounters, which was so useful. But if you do get into combat, it's decision-based. You can choose to take a stance, a defensive stance, use your crossbow, use your axe, go in all guns blazing. The choices really matter. And you will get tips on how to handle different enemies from people, so your knowledge grows, and you'll find it easier to pass encounters. Sometimes you'll come through them by the skin of your teeth. Sometimes you can fend them off easily. It's quite logical. You know, if a wolf pack is chasing you and you manage to take down one leader with your crossbow, the others might turn tail and run, that kind of thing. But sometimes you will die a few times. There was one battle where I had to pick 5 choices correctly in a row in order to defeat like a panther. It's a bit of a puzzle. And I think if I had managed to afford to buy knowledge from a local warden about the wildlife of the peninsula, I would have known what to do. But I had to do it in trial and error, and I died a few times there. But before long, I had rounded the peninsula for the first time. I had visited several villages, found some interesting outposts and inns, had survived and managed to make it through the nights. And the second time that you come around, sometimes there are turns on the main road, like you'll reach crossroads. Some things might be blocked, like by insects, a thick swarm of flies that you can't get through, by a large creature that's like scratching the trees to sharpen its claws, and you have no way of shooing it off, and it's best just to avoid that for now. Or by a cliff or a river that's too high, that kind of thing. That can change over time. The river might go down, the creature might leave, you might get some ointment to go through the insects, that kind of thing. And so it's really cool the way that it organically opens up to you, and doing repeat rounds of this map will allow you to really open up the landscape and to feel like it's a dynamic place that's changing and that you can master. There's also so much interesting stuff in the little villages. There is religions, there is the local politics. Do people want to open trade with the city? Some are yes, some say no. Everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own backstory. The writing is excellent. There are loads of really cool characters in this really fleshed out, organic feeling world. And after a while, I started to think this is pretty special, this game. It's quite masterful when you look at the complexity of it all, like the webs of relationships and histories of places and their interconnectedness and all of the different mechanics working together to allow you to unlock stories in different ways. Sometimes I couldn't persuade someone to do something, but I found out that I could maybe pay them or bribe them or exert pressure on them in other ways or appeal to them based on information that I had found out about them and their own desires, their own needs and histories. So it's very complex. It's beautifully done, and huge praise to the developer of this game. It's honestly a real masterwork in its discipline. And there is points at which you start to feel like you are establishing trust, and reputation and trust and relationships matter in this game. As you do more quests for people, they might open up a little more. And there are people dotted all around the map that you're keeping tabs on, doing tasks for. And I guess that's where the choices come in, the late game choices that I won't spoil here, but you do really get to choose which side you're going to be on. And there is so much more I haven't even touched on. It's such a rich game. For example, if you sleep, you'll see a moon on the screen, and you'll get dream sequences. Sometimes there is rain that will slow you down. If you're trying to travel on long distances and make you spend more time. Sometimes the trails are clear. Sometimes by making friends with locals, you can clear the track to travel faster. And you really feel like you're starting to have an effect on this world in such a cool way. There are creatures big and small. There's like a massive xenozoology project. Is that what it's called? Cryptozoological project that's just built into the fiction of this game. I think that Roadwarden is a really glowing example of game design and of good writing. So some of the upsides and downsides to finish off. Upsides, I would say the mood and vibe of this game are very special. Like you feel like you're in a place, strong sense of place, and the feeling of being on a really grand adventure that reminds me of games like A Link to the Past that I played when I was in my teens, my early teens, I think. I had a feeling that I was heading out into a world. You get the same thing in the Horizon games, or like a really good open world game. You know, when the world opens up to you and there is so much to see. I got that feeling in this game that just uses text and pixels. Kind of amazing, really. There were times when I'd be on a desolate beach somewhere and have a description of the tide whipping in, the clouds, the wildlife, scraps of material and shells. And I realized that I was having such a strong emotional reaction to the place, even more so or equal to some of the vistas that you'll see in like the best looking games ever, like Red Dead or Horizon Forbidden West. Like this game manages to summon up the same emotions with such a different set of tools, and I really admire that about it. And part of that is down to the world. It's so rich, it's deep, it's hostile, but really compelling and inviting, intriguing. You really want to see everything, and you get the feeling that step by step, you're going deeper into the most dangerous wilderness, that it doesn't want you to be there, and that you have to scrape by. It feels precarious. And that made me be tentative at first, and it made me feel like my choices mattered. Like, do I go forward and try and forge ahead, hoping there's somewhere to sleep, or do I turn back and waste the afternoon to be safe and that kind of thing? You're making those decisions constantly, and even in the late game, it keeps opening up in really interesting ways. So for the duration of the game, that feeling was constant. Even as you become more set up, the feeling remained with you that you were in a precarious situation. Also aided by the crisp UI. Everything is useful. Everything's in the right place. It's easy to learn how to use everything. Loads of potential frustrations have been avoided here. It's so well thought out. For example, if there's a route that you haven't explored on the map, there will be an arrow there. If you can pass, it's yellow. If you can't, it's grey. If you're wondering where you're going to end your day, places that are too far away to get before nightfall are greyed out, so you can see where your limit is. Little touches like that really make a big difference and really help the game along. If Seek Shelter button is great, so if you know you're coming to the end of the day and you're not sure exactly where to go to sleep, you can click Seek Shelter, automatically head to the nearest bed for the night. I also think the branching outcomes are great. Like, you can have a real impact on this world and on what happens in this world in a really big, sweeping, meaningful way. I really enjoyed that. When the option first appeared for me to end my journey, I was maybe 20 days in, and I just ended the game out of curiosity. So I got to see one ending that I would consider to be a bad ending, because I hadn't really done much with my job yet. I ended the game again way later at the actual end of the adventure, having completed loads of quests. Got a very different ending. Better, but still not good. Like, the individual things that you do affect outcomes for individual people, as well as the villages, and the trade route. The trade route itself will affect the fate of the whole region. So it's very consequential. I really enjoyed that about it. I felt that the choices were meaningful and that I was making a big impact on this world. And that's a lovely feeling to have in a game like this. I do have a few downsides here. Sometimes bits of knowledge and clues came in a strange order, I guess because of the open nature of the game. You might clock things sooner, you might manage to unlock someone's trust earlier based on whether you've succeeded in a hunt or something like that. There was a point at which an enchantress offered to sell me something, and I didn't know what it was yet, and I seemed to be supposed to. I think there was some information in my journal buried somewhere. I did look through it, but I couldn't find it, and I was like, I'm not sure that that's exactly right. I think the game's assuming I know something that I don't yet. I did get locked out of some valuable relationships without knowing why. So there is a little bit of stuff here that feels like there's a lot going on under the hood. And you can't be expected to memorize everything that you found or to fully understand the mechanics really quickly, especially if they're not visible. So for example, the cleanliness meter, like, you get a bath when you can buy soap if you have enough dragon bones for it, that kind of thing. But I wondered later if I had managed to max that out constantly and bathe at every opportunity, keep that star of cleanliness up at level 5, would people have trusted me more? If I had bought better clothing, which I ignored as an option, would they have responded to me in a different way? Would they have opened up to me differently if I was dressed differently? And those mechanics were invisible. That was a slight frustration to me. There was one character in particular called Foggy who never trusted me, never opened up to me, I couldn't do any jobs for her because she didn't trust me enough. And she seemed to be guarding some pretty key information. That was a frustration for me. I still don't know what I did wrong there, or if I did anything wrong at all. So the invisible status effects are a downside here. I would say also that the music loops melodically, and if you're in a location for 10 minutes, that gets repetitive. I sometimes turned my speaker off because the music was insistent. I felt like I was in a phone waiting queue sometimes. I do wonder sometimes if some ambient music might have been better in locations where you're going to be spending a lot of time, so you don't just get fatigued of the music. Other than that, I like the sound of the music though. It is melancholy. It has got that plucked string outback vibe going on. It's sad and interesting, but I don't know, sometimes it got on my nerves. There were a couple of relationships that I wished could have gone further. I felt like I fully unlocked the trust of some people, but I didn't feel intimacy with them somehow. I think I might have been supposed to feel that, but I didn't. I often felt like people that I really liked were still somehow at arm's length. Maybe that's where we reached the limit of what this text game managed. Like, it described a wonderful world, described interesting characters. I was embraced in some communities and shunned from others. But even at the moments where I was being fully embraced, I never quite felt a really intangible, ephemeral sense of intimacy that I found myself wanting somehow. So that's interesting, and I'd be curious to compare notes with other people on that subtlety of the game. And finally, there are some one-time events in this game. You'll get an audience with someone specific. If you get them too early and you don't have the right object, you can't do them again, and you aren't to know that going in. I guess this is where the saving comes in, but as I was role-playing, I didn't want to wind back the clock, especially not if I'd done a whole bunch of stuff and would have to do it all again. But those one-time events were a little frustrating. There was one character I met, and I really wished I had had a tool to get an outcome that I greatly desired and knew that I wanted, but I did not have the item that I needed, and I got it another hour of play later. So I guess you would have to replay the whole game to make that happen. Maybe it is a game that warrants a separate playthrough with a different character class, but I think I'd be reading a lot of the same stuff, so I'm not quite sure. But overall, those are small peeves, and they are constructive critiques, I guess. I think this is a great game, really, truly great game. Very atmospheric. I loved this world. I loved my experience. And even if you're not someone that usually plays on your laptop or your computer, I would say do it in this case. It's a game that needs a mouse, much better here than on console. This is definitely a game to play on Steam. So do play this one. Give it a try. That's Roadwarden. So that's Roadwarden. I hope you enjoyed that review. I went long there. I really didn't mean to go that long. It was 20 minutes of horror games and 40 minutes of Roadwarden. Turns out I had a lot to say about that game, but it's a really deep one. It's a really interesting one. I had a great experience with it. I hope you enjoyed hearing me talking about it. If you have made it this far, then well done. And you are welcome to come and continue the conversation over on Discord. You can join the Discord by becoming a patron of the show for as little as $1 a month. I really appreciate the support. It's a lovely community, and it's always fun when someone new arrives to talk about games with us all. A whole bunch of people in there talking all the time. So that's patreon.com/gaminginthewild if you would like to support the podcast and join the community. You can also talk to me on Twitter, on social media. I'm all over the place as Gaming in the Wild. You can email me. John is gaminginthewild@gmail.com. And finally, you can leave a review on iTunes if you're listening on an Apple device. Please do drop a star rating in a few words. It really helps the podcast to reach more people. You can also rate the podcast on Spotify. But thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this show. I'll be back next week with another one. I have a few games that I am supposed to review. I have full notes for Rollerdrome, which I was planning to do this week, but Roadwarden just took over my brain. So maybe it's Rollerdrome next week. Maybe it's Four Tales, the narrative card game that I've been playing. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's Dead Space. Maybe I just end up playing Dead Space for the next week, completely out of character. But I am really enjoying that game, even though it's quite horrible. Anyway, thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other, and bye-bye for now.